Is it possible for you to buy your next home or perhaps your first home using essentially no money down? Well, this might sound like a clickbaity Facebook ad that you see throughout your social media feed. It actually is possible, and it's through a little concept called equity, which is what I'm going to explain in this video. So if you are a first-time home buyer or a young family looking to get into their next property purchase, stick around. I think this one will be of interest for you. Hi, my name's Andy. I'm a Sydney-based buyer's agent who works in Sydney's Inner West. I help young couples and first-time home buyers get their foot in the door in the really competitive Sydney real estate market. So if that sounds like you, smash the subscribe button so you don't miss any golden nuggets along the way. Okay, so let's start off with the basics. What is equity? Essentially, equity is the difference between the value of the home and the mortgage that is secured against the property. So just to keep numbers really simple, imagine you buy a $1 million property. You put down a 10% deposit against the property, so you put in 100K of your own money and you get a $900,000 mortgage secured against that property. Your equity is essentially the deposit. Now let's fast forward, say 10 years, and you'll have hopefully seen some very good growth in that property. 10 years time, that $1 million property is now worth $2 million. It's doubled in value. Again, just to keep numbers simple. Now, also to keep things simple, we're going to say you had an interest-only mortgage during those 10 years. So your 900K mortgage is still secured against that property. You haven't paid a cent off the principal. However, now the difference between the value of the property and the mortgage is no longer the 100K deposit. It's now the 100K deposit plus the extra, which is $1 million. So your equity in that property is now $1.1 million. Now, another term that a lot of financial institutions or banks use when talking about equity is LVR. So that's loan to value ratio. And that's essentially the ratio between your debt to your equity, or how much you own in the property. So when you initially bought it for $1 million and you put in $100,000 of your own money and you had a $900,000 mortgage secured against it, your LVR was 90%, which is $900,000 divided by $1 million. So a 90% LVR is a very highly leveraged amount of debt you have against the asset. Now, essentially, you are aiming as an investor to own the entirety of the property, to have a 0% LVR or as close to zero as possible. The less debt you have against the property, the less repayments you're going to have on the mortgage, and the more security you're going to have or ownership on that asset you're going to have. So you want to get that down as low as possible. So using the previous example, 10 years on, when the property is now worth $2 million, but the mortgage is still 900K, you do the exact same formula, 900K divided by the new value, which is $2 million, and that gives you an LVR, or loan to value ratio, of 45%. So that means there's only 45% of the asset is in debt, or you own 55% of it, whereas before you only owned 10% of it. And the equity in a property is essentially why property is such a strong asset or strong store of value, because even though you haven't paid a cent off that mortgage, the mortgage is still 900K. Just by letting time do its thing, you've owned more of the property because the property will increase in value. And as it increases in value, you own more of the property, thus you have more equity, thus you have a lower LVR. Now, that is the equity in the home, what we've just gone over there, the difference between the value of the home and the mortgage that's secured against the property. That's your equity. So using the previous example, 10 years on, when it's now valued at $2 million, your equity is $1.1 million, and the 900K difference makes up the mortgage. So imagine that you wanted to go to the bank and you wanted to refinance. You are not entitled to take that $1.1 million and say, this is all the equity in the home, therefore it's mine, and I want to strip it all out and use it to go buy all these fancy lavish things. The banks won't really allow you to do that because equity is technically debt. So they will want you to refinance your mortgage from 90K up to the new amount, and the difference between that $900,000 and the new refinance amount is your usable equity. So using the previous example, if you have that $2 million property and you have the mortgage at 900K, you have a 45% LVR secured against that property. If you wanted to refinance it up to 80% LVR, that would give you a mortgage now of $1.6 million. That difference between the $900,000 original mortgage and the new $1.6 million mortgage, 700K in this example, that is your usable equity. And that 700K you can strip out and use into another property purchase, or use it in your current home for renovations, or you can put it in as a line of credit. There's a few different things you can do. But one thing I would say you absolutely have to do is go talk to a mortgage broker, go talk to your accountant, and go talk to a qualified tax advisor. Talk to all three of those people to find out your best possible scenario, because not everybody needs to refinance, and everybody's goals and what everybody wants to achieve is completely different, and there's no one size fits all type strategy when it comes to property investing. Now, let's say you've gone ahead and you've refinanced your current mortgage up to the new amount and you've stripped out some usable equity and you're kind of thinking about what you should do. Or perhaps you're a first-time home buyer who's watching this and you're thinking, I don't have any property, so I can't do this, and this video isn't really relevant to me. That's not true. This video is just as relevant to first-time home buyers as it is to people who currently own a home and are thinking about refinancing and stripping out some usable equity. So a common type of client that I talk to is a young family that have, say, a 2-bed apartment here in Sydney. And now they're thinking about kids, so perhaps they're going to have a second kid, and they're thinking, this 2-bed apartment is looking pretty small now. We need to, get something a bit more family orientated. Maybe we don't want to live so close to the city anymore. We might want to go out into the suburbs area where there's a bit more space. They are thinking, let's strip out the equity in our apartment that we've owned for the last 5 to 10 years and use that to fund in our new property purchase. This is a really, really common strategy. So what they would do is they would go to a mortgage broker, see if they can service the new refinanced amount. So like I said, using the previous example, if you wanted to go from a 900K mortgage up, refinance it up to $1.6 million, that is technically debt. So you need to prove to the bank that you can service that new mortgage, and then you can strip it out and put it into your next property purchase. So this is why it's so important to go and talk to a qualified and reputable mortgage broker, and they can go through what it is that you're trying to achieve, and they can give you the best quality product depending on what different lenders offer. So if you are a current homeowner, using the equity and stripping it out and funding it into your next home purchase is essentially buying the property with what feels like no money down, no free money, even though it's technically debt. But you don't have to use your pockets to pay for the stamp duty, for the deposit, for the conveyancing fees, for the building and pest, any of the due diligence, all those upfront costs that come associated with buying property. You don't really have to go through it if you have enough equity in your current home and if you can service the new equity refinancing. So it's a great strategy, and it essentially feels like you're buying property with no money down. Now, if you're a first-time home buyer, you might be thinking, this doesn't really apply to me because I don't own any property, so I can't strip out any current equity and put it into my next property purchase. Now, while this might be true, you might own any property in your own name. More than likely, your parents own a property. And depending on their circumstances, you will have to go and obviously talk to them and find out what they want. But if they're happy in their current home and they've owned it for, potentially decades, they will be able to refinance that. And if they have a very, very low LVR, potentially own it outright, they can refinance a certain portion of it and use that equity to put into your property purchase and help you get your foot in the door and finally get on the property ladder. This can be a very difficult conversation for a lot of people because a lot of people don't like asking for help, and they like to say, I've done it myself, I've done it without any help. The fact is, there's no medals for saying I've done it myself. If you're going to spend 5 years trying to save a deposit when your parents would gladly just refinance a portion of their home and use that equity to get you on the property ladder. You're not getting any medal for saving and making your life extremely difficult for 5 years if you have parents there that have an asset that they can leverage and get you into the property market. Because essentially here, all you're trying to do is improve your wealth position. And the longer you're in the market, the stronger your wealth position will be in 20, 30, 40 years time. So delaying that by 4 or 5 years just to save up a deposit, just so you can say to people for your pride that you've done it yourself, it doesn't really make sense, because no one's going to care in 10, 20, 30 years anyway. So just to recap, if you are a first-time home buyer, go and talk to your parents, see if they're open to the idea of it. Go talk to a mortgage broker, regardless of if you're a first-time home buyer or a current homeowner, and see if there is any equity you can strip out from your current home or from your parents' home as well. Because anybody who's been in the Sydney real estate market knows how fiercely competitive it is here. And the more time you spend out of the market, the harder and harder it's going to be. Bottom line, you're never, ever going to be able to save faster than an asset is appreciating at.